Okay, and here we are. Welcome, everybody. This is the second in a never-ending series, maybe, of show and tell. I am your host. You guys all know me. Let me get the clock out of there and move it away. And let's get right to it, guys. But let me say, while we're on the tape, if you look at the four pictures on the screen, if you can name all four of those layouts and send them to me in an email, showdirector@amherstrail.org, you will win a 2020 commemorative car. So hang in there and check it out and see what you can come up with. So our first presenter, guys, is Phil Johnson. And let me just say one thing. I promised I wouldn't do too much of an intro, but this one is important in that we got some feedback from the last meeting. And the feedback was, hey, let's do more clinic related. And people actually mentioned Phil. So Phil has come up with a little bit more detail on what he's been up to. So Phil, with that, let me find your name in this alphabetical list, which is long at this point. So let me give you the presentation. There you go, Phil. So take it away. And we'll let you know if we could see your screen. Okay.
Okay, you should be able to see my screen. Let me just hide everything. And everybody hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Should be. Okay, great. And we'll start from the beginning. Okay, like John said, the last time I kind of breezed through a bunch of things that I was working on, and I had two slides, a pile of sticks and wood siding parts, and then a completed building, and people wanted more. How did you get from A to B? So I threw this together in the last 7 or 8 days. Took about 5 days to build a South River kit. So I came up with this clinic on how to build a wooden kit, or how not to be afraid to assemble one, like Campbell, Suydam, Fine Scale, Bar Mills, and similar. I like the South River kits, but he's out of business, so there aren't any more. So first thing you do is buy a kit. $290 for South Rivers. They're not cheap, but they're excellent. Then you decide what you're going to build out of the kit. Most of the South River kits had at least 2 structures in it, and I chose this little smaller building, the one with the truck backed up to it. And that's what I'm going to show you how to build. South River's nice. They come up with this book for telling you how to build it. But I always recommend people read the entire book, cover to cover, because there's a lot of hints and things in there. Then you have to decide if you're going to weather the building, make it look old and dilapidated, fit your time period. You may have different things. I build it stock, straight up, right out of the box. So then you got to gather your tools and materials. And I love a clean workspace. This is a list of the tools that I used. At the end, I've got my email. I can email you a list with some pictures in it. So I'm not even going to read the list, but there's just a bunch of little stuff that you need. Okay, this is the picture I showed last time. On the left, there's various strip woods. There's some pewter detail castings, window castings, laser cut siding, some resin castings used for stonework and such things. That's fairly typical for his. I think the resin castings are unique to Bob's kits, but you may find them in some kits you buy someday. Okay, so first you select the parts and mark them. I like to mark the inside of the building side so I know which wall I'm looking at, because you can see that they're almost mirror images of each other. And then you make a list of all the small strip wood parts, divide them into the ones that need to be painted, like trim paint, or the ones that are interior hidden that don't need paint, so you don't have to bother with them. I gather all my paints and inks, and I like to use the free little ketchup cups that you get at Wendy's or McDonald's to put the paint in while you're painting. Just squirt a little in there and then dab out of there. Not much goes to waste, and you don't feel bad about throwing them away. I like to craft acrylics. They're usually less than $1 at like Walmart and some of the other craft stores, so those are really good, actually. We like the South River kits tell you to use an ink wash, about 30% ink to isopropyl alcohol mix. It really brings out the grain in the wood And if you put a coat on after you've colored it, it gives it a nice beat up, washed down version. You can see that I've painted that left-hand one with ink wash already. But anything you put on that dry wood is going to cause it to swell, like that one on the left. So you put it under some weight for about 24 hours. I like these building bricks. I got a pile of them somewhere, and I use them all the time to flatten that stuff out. There it is. I've ink washed it. It's just about ready for the first coat of paint. You choose your final colors. Sometimes it requires mixing. The yellow that I had on hand at home was a little too bright, so I cut it down with gray on about 20% gray. Gave me a nice color that I liked. The Ponce wheel is an interesting thing that Bob taught me about. It actually put nail marks in your wood siding, and it turns out in HO that about a 1/4 inch is just about right for 16, 18-inch spacing on the thing. So you just kind of run that along, and it puts little perforations in the sidewalls. Really nice job. We add these 1/8 by 1/8 stiffeners on the corners to keep everything straight and square. Also, it helps you building up your corner supports. You paint the windows and doors with your trim color. Use sprue cutters to cut them so that they're nice and flush with the edge of the molding. I always paint them on the sprues still, because then they don't get fingerprints and stuff all over them. Then you put the windows and the glass and the doors in the sides, and then start fabbing up the sides. That tray that those are sitting on is a micro mark thing. It gives you nice right angles and a little bit of sidewall. Down the lower part, I've got one of those corner clamps and another kind of magnetic corner clamp. Any of those kind of things can help you build a nice square corner. You finish gluing the sides together. You add a base and a roof. The South River kits use this press board for roofing material, and it works really nice. Then you start preparing your roofing material. Tar paper can be made from like thin brown craft paper, like a paper bag, not the grocery bags, the thinner ones, the smaller ones, like from a 6-pack of soda or something. You spray it a nice flat black on one side. You can scuff it up a little bit, make it a little texture, and then you cut it to scale size, 36-inch by 36 feet, to simulate a roll of roofing. Then you've got end laps and seams and that sort of thing when you roll it out. I like to use glue stick to hold that on, because it's just paper onto paper. That's a perfect thing. You've got a little repositioning time while you're working with it. This building had a little raised roof section. I built that right in place after the roofing was applied. Kind of worked well for me. I like to add the interior details before I do any gluing the base in place. Sometimes there's a floor that goes inside. Or if I am not going to put an interior in, this one has really small windows, so it's not much point in putting an interior in. So I use black construction paper, like a view block, so you don't see through it or it looks like a hollow building. And then you build up your external details, like loading docks, steps, ramps, that sort of thing. I built this dock right on top of the plan sheet using scotch tape with the sticky side up so I could keep things in place. And I've weathered those sticks with just the ink wash, no paint on that. Then you start fabbing up your parts and put your signs on it, and you're just about done. Take pride in your work and show off your new kit. If you want a list of the tools, just send me a request to hamdenphil@gmail.com. Thanks for your time. If you want more clinic things, add a note to the comments afterwards, or let John know. I may or may not do another clinic, but if you want more stuff or something different, let John know. And I'm done. Thanks, guys.
Great, Phil. Thank you very much. It is appreciated. And guys, next, and we've got a nice, well-rounded presentation tonight. Next is a presentation is Dee Matias, and she is going to give us a little presentation about how she's building traingeek.com. So with that, let me first just head up to my name. And guys, I said in rehearsal that I wouldn't make myself the presenter again, But now that I've got more people here, I want you to look at the screen one more time, and then D, you'll be all set to go. These 4 pictures are 4 separate layouts. So this is our door prize. This is our virtual door prize. If you recognize those 4 layouts, and they are 4 separate layouts, let me know in an email. And if you get all 4, you win a 2020 commemorative car. And you remember there were those black guns, I think. So you'll get one of those. So that's what that's all about. That having been said, D, let me make you the presenter. I just have to find you in the list. There you are. Alphabetically, you think I wouldn't have any trouble. And I'm making you the presenter now. So go ahead and make yourself and accept the presenter mode, and you will be there.
All right. Can you see my screen?
We can.
Excellent. So this is my new website, traingeek.com. I've owned the domain for years, wanted to build a website. Until recently, I didn't really have the time to get around to it. It's not just about trains. It's also, various other interests of mine, other nerdery. But it is primarily about going to have, train content and a lot of my photos. I'm building it on squarespace.com. I can talk about that a little more if we have time, but I don't want to get us too far into the weeds there. So first, this is my, the landing page. It's just my blog. I'm actually going to go in reverse order because I think it makes a little more sense. This is just my About Me page. Here I am rail fanning the Hellgate Bridge in New York. And then you have the gallery. I have another 1,000, 2,000 photos I need to upload here still, so that'll take me a while. But you can click through to any of them, see any of them larger, and, take a look at pictures. And you can click through to, one of the other
Take that off.
stuff.
No one see.
All right, I'm hearing some background chatter. Is there anything wrong with the feed? Okay. So this is this is Oakland. I was visiting my father in January, so these are some of my photos from there. You can click through yourself if you're interested in looking at any of these, but there's a bunch of different photos. This one is from Sacramento, Roseville, near Sacramento. We were going to the Railroad Museum in Sacramento and then continued on to the Union Pacific Yard. This is a photo I took as the sun was setting. I rather like it. I also experimented with, with hypersaturating it, more experimental editing. Not quite as realistic, but I think it looks interesting. You can take it or leave it as you so choose. We've got my best photos. I've still got a bunch more to upload here. This is when the Penn Central Heritage Unit came through East Deerfield not that long ago. Well, I guess at this point, it was a while, back in December. Yeah, and we've got, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, the old Bethlehem steel mill. This is the High Line that they've converted into a park after Bethlehem Steel lay dormant for many years. I actually have a tattoo of this very steel mill from a photo I took back, I want to say 2007. But yeah, these are different photos. Here's Worcester. Looking down from, I forget the name of the street, it overlooks the new expanded intermodal yard as they have grown. This was a few years ago that CSX did that expansion. And then the homepage, the final page, is my blog. I still have a lot of work I want to do in here. I want to add individual RSS feeds so you can see, if you're interested in just one of the subjects, you can just see, the steel mill related photos, or if you want to be a transit nerd, you can see the buses. But This is, I've got links to different sites of interest, various other photo sites and so forth. I have some of my own content talking about, some of my photo sets. This is again for Bethlehem, and my little blurb about that and so forth. Yeah, that's pretty much my site. I've got a lot of work I want to do. Still need to add some features. I want to add an email subscription, so you don't have to use RSS, but you can get new updates whenever I post. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Cool. Dee,
Next,
thank you so much. And guys, just
should I?
another thing that everybody's working on. So I think it's very cool. What?
No, sorry, I was just going to say introduce Gary Muncie, but if you want to take that over, go for it.
Yeah, only because I want people as they join. And I think, well, we're up to 35, 40 people now. So I will grab it back from you. So I'll make myself the presenter. And guys, before we introduce Gary, thank you though, Dee. That was a change from on the fly
Yeah,
change.
something different.
Yeah, so keep us all alert. Guys, the 4 pictures, tell me whose layouts they are. Send it to me in an email, showdirector@amherstrail.org, and you'll win a 2020 commemorative car. So if you want, you can take a screenshot of what you're looking at right now. With that, our next person, guys, Gary Muncie, one of our board members, and he's going to talk about his railroad, the Cheat River Railroad. So, Gary, let me hold on just one second. Let me find you. There you are. And I am going to make you the presenter now, Gary. So all you have to do is accept, and we'll see your screen. There you go. We got you, Gary. Gary, are you there? There you go. Gary, can you hear us? Give us
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah, that was
All right.
That was my fault.
All right, coming to you live from the Cheat River Railroad headquarters in Pepperell, Massachusetts. We're talking about operations on my Cheat River Railway. One of the questions is, why and where is the Cheat River? So, one of my favorite railroads was the Western Maryland, which became part of the Chessie system in the 70s. After many trips down to Maryland, Pennsylvania, and the South in the 80s and 90s, photographed many coal trains on the former Chessie and Western Maryland trackage, now owned by CSX. So, after considering options on what to build for a railway, I chose to build the Cheat River Railway, which I model after the Western Maryland. Now, for the name, the Cheat River is a 78.3-mile-long river that stretches between West Virginia and Pennsylvania, and the former Western Maryland follows a good portion of that line. The Cheat River was created in the mid-'80s when CSX was getting rid of duplicate rail lines. The Cheat River is comprised of former Western Maryland lines extending from Fort Covington, Maryland to Hagerstown, Maryland, continuing to Durban, West Virginia, Westernport, Bayard, and Cheat Junction. At Durban, the Cheat River interchanges with CSX. The Cheat also operates a former Western Maryland and Reading branch from Hagerstown to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And our railroad services customers in Cumberland, Maryland via the former Connellsville Extension main line. We also have 5 coal loaders on the railroad that keeps us busy, and a large paper mill in Cedar Cliff. So there's an actual map of the old Western Maryland, and basically I highlighted in yellow of where the Cheat River Railway would run. Day 1, the groundwork has begun. April 18th, April 19th, 2008. That's the foundation for Knob Mount Yard. That's when we started building the railroad. Progress in December 2008, track laying at Knobmount Yard with Dave and Josh West, Dave Gale, Jim Fenner, and Rob Cabrera. Now you're gonna love this one. That's one far corner of the basement, and I thought, how am I gonna build this railroad? Look at this basement, you know. So April 17, 2010, we started cleaning out the basement. Bob Hayes and Dave Gale's giving us a hand doing it. This would become the future town of Gorman. May 15, 2010, all cleaned out. Bob Hayes is starting to paint the walls for the backdrops. March 16, 2011, still looking at Gorman, same corner, but we got some bench work and some styrofoam down. And this is Gorman today. I took this photo just last week. So the Cheat River Motive Power roster is made up of used locomotives from the three major builders, General Electric, Alco, and EMD. The roster was specifically created for the Cheat River by Rob Cabrera and our buddy Uncle Wayne Allen. And they created the list of locomotives based on what was available in the used locomotive market in the mid-'80s. We've got quite a colorful roster with patched and painted locomotives. We use two schemes. The red scheme is a design I created years ago for an Alaskan fictitious railroad called the Klondike and Western. The gray scheme is based on colors of the former Family Lines and Seaboard System railroads, which use gray, red, and yellow. And there's a couple of samples of the Cheat River Power, the gray scheme, the red, and a patched out Penn Central locomotive for Cheat River. Now for our train symbols, we run time freights, which are also known as road freights, between Harrisburg, Port Covington, and Durban. An example of a time freight is TFHD1, time freight, Harrisburg to Durban, first westbound. We run way freights as well between the smaller yards, and some operate out of the larger yards. A way freight symbol would be way freight BD, for example, way freight Bayard to Durban. Our locals, we run 3 or 4 locals in and out of the big yards, and the designation is basically for the yard it works out of, KNL1, which is the first knob mount local. And that local services the West Vaco paper mill in Cedar Cliff. Our unit trains are identified by a symbol, for example, LCRM, loaded coal, Reynolds to Mount Storm. Some more before and after photos. This is August 25th, 2010, looking down the aisle between Cumberland and Knobmount. Knobmount is on the right, Cumberland is on the left. Cumberland was a last-minute decision to build. It wasn't even planned. 1 year later, a little bit more progress in Cumberland with some track being laid down. This is Cumberland today. It's fun part of the railroad to switch. So one of the locals that works the railroad is the KNL2 local that works Cumberland. The crew reports at Cumberland to handle Conrail interchange traffic with a Conrail engine to Knobmount Yard. Well, anybody knows Conrail didn't go to Cumberland, but they did go to Bedford, Pennsylvania, back in the day when the Pennsylvania Railroad had a branch line. The Western Maryland had a branch line up to Hindman as well. So in my railroading scenario, Conrail comes all the way to Cumberland. So the KNL2 crew will take the interchange to Knobmount Yard, swap out cars for the local customers in Cumberland, return to do the switching with a Cheat River engine. Once that's done, they go back to Knobmount, swaps the cars for the outbound interchange traffic for Conrail, returns to Cumberland, and calls it a day. This is a sample of one of my switching cards. This is for the KNL2. Basically, it's got the instructions for the operator who's going to work the local. Shows the industries being switched. I do have schematics as well as showing the customer locations. Down below is my way bills that I use. I use a four position way bill from Ship It. And that's the Sheet River Alco 101 doing some switching at the Food Lion Distribution Center in Cumberland. Here we got Sheet River Alco. This is battery, by the way. The battery's in the C415, the second unit. I'm running on battery power in this one, and we're switching the 84 Lumber Company in Cumberland. And operations in the Sheet River continued on as we're building layout. Here's Steve Belforti operating the KNL1 paper mill switcher in June of 2012. A little bit more before and after. This is August 25th, 2011, looking down the bench work towards Hagerstown. This is looking towards Hagerstown today. And with the COVID virus and being stuck in the basement, I've got a lot of scenery done in this area that you see now. Whoop, there's our president-elect, Alco Joe B. at Cheat Junction, July 23rd, 2012. And Cheat Junction today. Cheat Junction, by the way, is a switchback to get to my upper level. I don't use a helix, I use a switchback. Makes it a little bit more fun to operate, takes the boredom out of running around in circles around your basement. And the last part of my presentation, a little video of a Cheat River empty coal train. That's it for me, John. Sheet River Dispatcher signing off.
All right, thanks. I love the before and after pictures because it really gives you a great idea of how you got started, what you use for base, and then how cool it looks afterwards. So thank you, Gary, very much. I appreciate that. So guys, we've got one more. We're missing one of our presenters, and I'm not sure what happened. I haven't heard anything. But let me just go back and make myself the presenter just so you could see those four pictures one more time while we tee up our final presenter of the evening, guys. And Latimer, known as Lad, has been all around, and he'll tell you more about this. He's a professor at University of Hartford, lives up in Amherst, I might add. So Lad, with that, I see you changed one of the names, so I can make you the presenter right now. You should have it, Lad. And let me, hold on one second, Lad. Let me give you some sound here. Hold on, Lad. It's
How about this?
there you go. It was on you. Yeah, we got you.
Okay, thanks, John. Well, it's a pleasure to be here talking to all of you people who know a lot more about trains than I do. What I'm going to talk about is a little travel. As both my wife and I and our family have traveled a lot in the last, I guess, 3.5 decades. Don't know how much more we'll do now until COVID responds. But I was when I was thinking about this, I mentioned to John that I had a large collection of trains that I bought around the country and around the world. I actually wrote an article for Model Railroader about this about 25 years ago or so. And at that point, Dick Joyce asked me to show some at the show. But otherwise, I haven't done much more other than having my large collection, probably call a hoarder rather than a collector. But let me tell you a little about buying trains around the world over the last decade. I guess I got interested in trains again in England and Scotland while in graduate school. I was there right the year after I graduated college, where my roommates and I cycled from Scotland to Land's End and back, and taking some trains. And then went in grad school, I spent a summer at University of St Andrews, and taking trains from London to St Andrews and around Scotland was kind of useful. Then finally, after getting a real job and making money, we did a lot of traveling with myself and my wife, and it turns out I've been to over 25 countries. But we also lived for a semester or longer in both Sweden and Austria, which meant my collections in Sweden and Austria became a larger part. All the trains, with a couple of minor exceptions, have been bought in their home country. I will say none were made by internet. Obviously, if you want a European collection, you can just hop on the internet, and an hour later you can have as many trains as you want from as many companies. But I'm country. I'm sort of a purist. I don't want to. If I don't get the country in the country of issue, I don't purchase it. Okay, let's talk a little about model railroading outside the U.S. How it is a little different. With the exception of places like Australia, where there's a lot of land, most people live in apartments, and 1,000 square feet is a large apartment. So there's not a lot of room for home layouts the way there is here. In UK, England, most layouts are built in garden sheds. I mean, people buy, with the climate there, since you can get into your shed mostly all year, not like New England, they take a garden shed, insulate it. In fact, the equivalent of model railroad planning has chapters on how to insulate your garden shed, and people build it in the sheds. I also talk about how to get planning permission, because in England you don't usually own the land under your house. But a lot of people have shelf layouts. A lot of people have single shelf layouts of a single scene, are very popular in shows, especially in England, where they have lists of layouts to be shown at different shows, and every builder of a layout produces a list of shows he will be showing at in the next year. Although the layouts are shelf, they're not modular layouts. There's nothing like the belt lines. Even people will not build the belt modules and have them connected. You only have the shelf for your layout. Typically, the shelf layouts are maybe 15 feet long, 10 to 15 feet, with fiddle yards at each end, which is blocked off. So you really just see a single scene, and operate on timetable or operated in some form. They get very serious about how they operate them. What I found in European layouts is most hobbyists typically adhere to an era. I mean, it's absolutely, you never have anything in your collection outside the particular era, particular country, whatever you want. Except for Europeans. Europeans often build layouts at borders. And for example, you build like near Basel, Switzerland, or a fictitious town near Basel, you could have French, Swiss, Austrian, and German trains coming through there. So that's sort of the way they get around it. So what I thought I'd show for the next few minutes is a couple examples of my collection, maybe talk a little about how I got some of them, especially in countries where English is not the native language. Go to England. UK was the first country I bought trains, and on the upper left we have half of a DMU. These are very popular. I used to ride them in college, so I remembered that was one of sort of my first purchase. Although the pictures were taken at different times, the middle coach of the left second row, was actually bought at the same time after being told by the salesman that wasn't prototypical. He almost didn't want me to buy that coach if I bought a DMU, because you should not run that coach between the two. A couple of years ago, we were in Scotland, so I picked up a ScotRail, and on the lower left is a coal car and a Yeoman. Foster Yeoman is a big aggregate company in England. Interestingly, Foster Yeoman runs its own engines. In most of England now, the tracks are owned by the federal government or by a company that is owned by the government, and then anyone who wants to run a train can just lease the track. Foster Yeoman, being an aggregate producer, needs a lot of trains to move rock and stone around, and they have, interesting enough, that they actually are the only company that really have their own engines, and all their engines are American. They bought them from mostly GE and GM, and they are 100% American, although looking a little like British. And the bottom right is just another typical British engine with the more modern Brit Rail livery. We've been to the Benelux countries, Luxembourg, Netherlands many times, and actually all three. The middle coach is a Luxembourg coach. I didn't mention that there's the two divisions, of course, as some of you may remember, that in HO in Europe, either you run Markland or you run DC. Markland, of course, AC, 3-rail, stud rail. And so the Luxembourg coach and the lower left Belgian coach are actually Markland. But Markland actually makes a set of insulated wheels for the coach, so you can buy that and pop it in for all their, well, you can't get their engines, but any other car you can buy the insulated wheels and pop them right in, and so they'll run on normal DC operation. And there's a typical Belgian freight car. There's still a lot of freight cars that look like this today, even though that sort of looks like what we'd see in a grade B movie from the 40s. Sweden is a country, as I said, we probably call that our second home. Probably over the last 30 years, we spent almost at least a full year in Sweden. These are just 4 examples of Swedish. One is this is a Markland steel car, and it's fenced with steel. It had rolls of steel. There's a Swedish switcher. There's an X2000 engine. Some of you may remember the X2000 because that was one of the contenders when the Excella was built. And they shipped an X2000 over, and it ran the Northeast Corridor for a couple of months when Amtrak was trying to decide on which high-speed train to use. This train was bought. It's very interesting. It's a dummy engine made by Heljan, which is one of the high-end producers, and it was for sale at the ticket office of a very small train station. And it was, so I bought. It was very cheap, and I bought it while I was buying my ticket. And we have this is a more modern livery of a Swedish coach. Austria, our second home. The top is not the Crocodile, although it looks like the Crocodile you might see that MTH makes. This is one of their smaller engines that has sort of the crocodile look, and the coach next to it. These are all these examples of the Austrian are what are called Kleinbaum. Kleinbaum was a low-end train company that has since gone out of business. They had their own stores. They only sold in their own stores. They had probably half a dozen to a dozen. There was one in, there was actually a couple in Vienna. There was Salzburg, Innsbruck, a few other towns. They were very relatively expensive, probably about a third to maybe a quarter of what other HO trains were. So when I bought these, the top two I bought on my first trip in the 80s. When we lived in Austria in 2002, I bought the next group. That's a work engine. It's very nice because it actually will run in about 6-inch radius curves. I mean, I actually run that regularly in my office without just on the top of a bookshelf. And then below is the only example of a steam engine I have from Europe, which happens to be just one, the Austrian Kleinbaum. And I bought a lot of Kleinbaum when I was there because we were there for 6 months and rented a house. So I used some cardboard I got from someone buying a washing machine to build as a baseboard and ran a loop of track. And my daughter and I had a lot of fun with that. Once I was in the Vienna subway and I began buying a ticket, and there is HO Trains standing behind the ticket window. And the guy didn't want to sell it to me at first. I didn't find out until years later what the reason was. He sort of gave me this lecture, not knowing a lot of English, and but what basically the idea was there should have been 2 cars, and he only had 1 car for that particular set. But I convinced him that I really wanted to buy it, and so I have 1 Vienna subway car. Italy, there's 2 examples. The upper was bought in Rome. We had been in Italy for about a week and a half or 2 weeks, didn't find any trains, although it got taken by the Italian train system. We were supposed to take the first-class train from Naples to Rome. Trains went on strike, so even though we had a first-class ticket, we ended up in a train that was 100 degrees. We had to stand in the vestibule for the whole train ride. Below that is a Sicilian train, and it's a more modern train I bought about 3 or 4 years ago in Sicily. Have to have France, and there's an example of the TGV. This interesting story about this one. This was bought at the entrance to the Folies Bergère on the Champs-Élysées. Right at the entrance to the nightclub was a train store, and I happened to pick this up. I actually picked it up. They would only sell it to me if I bought track and a transformer. So I had to buy an inexpensive transformer and a loop of track, which I then set up in our hotel room for a while. But that was, but it also gave me a 220-volt transformer, for which I've used off and on. Here's some West German Markland tin plates, and these were made right after the war, and they were definitely said American. I think one said made in West Germany, others said made in the American zone. So these are really early models right in the post-war era. Switzerland, again, 3 examples of various Swiss coaches that I purchased. This was the Trans-European Night coach, which is sort of a set of trains that did not label by country except the owner, but it sort of runs in pool service throughout Europe. And one Swiss O-gauge coach. Since I run more O-gauge than anything else, I found this when we were living in Innsbruck at sort of a tag sale that my daughter's school was having. I think I paid about $1 for the coach. It was a template coach. Had no idea what it was, but said looked like nice size. I thought maybe I could find what to do with it. Finally, it took about 10 years on the internet finding out that there's a company called HAG, which is a very high-end Swiss manufacturer of tin plate, and it was their coach. I did not have trucks or couplers. Looked at it, and it was about the same size as Lionel 027 coaches. So at one of the dealers at our show, I bought some Lionel trucks and couplers and roughly eyeballed where it would be on a Lionel coach, and it runs very well around our Christmas tree. In the Soviet Union in Leningrad, before the fall of communism, I did have one opportunity to look for trains. I went to the train museum there, which, according to the people there, I was the first non-Soviet that was in the train museum. It was a train model museum. They had a wonderful 150th display, and actually a great HO display. No trains for sale in the gift shop, though. Went to the department store, and after walking around, there was this one train, and it was a complicated way of getting it, because you had to, once you picked out what you wanted, they gave you a ticket, which they didn't explain to me right away at first. You had to go down 2 floors to pay for it, then come back up again, and then they gave it to you. You figured out what you bought, and it turns out it's a TT gauge railcar team made in East Germany. So I felt, okay, that's as close as I can get it in Leningrad. I did buy another East German car, probably in West Germany, well, in Germany after reunification, but that was another car made in German by that, I think the same factory, although this would happen to be HO. On the lower right is a Romanian car. I've never been to Romania. This is one that doesn't fit what I usually buy, but I actually was in Budapest at the time, going back to Vienna. The train I was going to be on was actually a Romanian train that was scheduled to go from Bucharest to Berlin via Budapest and Vienna. And I found out you could buy a model of the particular coaches that were in that train. So that's why I couldn't find any Hungarian trains, but I thought, well, since I've been on this type of coach, it would be worthwhile to have. Denmark, again, I probably should put some Norwegian cars. Ukraine, being of Ukrainian background, there are two examples. The lower right sort of gondola is a made in Latvia for the local Ukrainian community, and the upper left is a modern coach. I believe it's actually made in Western Europe, but it is livered for Ukraine. China. I have never been to China, but one of my wife's PhD students, after graduating, was going through China, was visiting her family in China, and came upon the Bachmann store. Bachmann, as we know of it in the U.S. for its HO, and of course for its Williams O gauge. Bachmann is very popular in China, in England, and in the U.S. In China, they actually have Bachmann stores. So they remembered having their kids play with trains at our house in Amherst, so they bought these items for me. The engine is a limited edition Mao Zedong engine, and it's one of 200 made. It has all this documentation with it, and the coach behind it is a typical coach that they said was used at that point in time. Japan, I've been to Japan a couple of times, and here's a couple of examples of Japanese trains. Japanese is probably the hardest place to buy trains because typical Japanese apartment is about 400 square feet, 400 to 500 square feet. So people don't have a lot of room for layouts. And most trains in Japan are N gauge. I said I'd only buy a train if I could get HO. Walking in a department store one day, I was walking around, couldn't find any trains. Looked in the looking at magazines, if I could buy a train magazine, maybe try to figure out something in Japanese. And there's a guy reading Model Railroader, because Model Railroader is on the newsstand. So I figured, okay, if he's reading Model Railroader, he must speak some English. And he explained that he was on yes, there was trains, and yes, the store had trains, except that HO was on a different floor than N. So he showed me where to go, and I got my examples. The lower container car came from Yokohama, and a little story about this. I was at a conference, and one of the exhibitors had a huge number of these as part of their exhibit. And I tried to convince them to give me one, but the person who spoke English the best, I think, would agree to, but the person sort of who kept the records of everything noted that he had a label and he had to return X number of cars after the exhibit was over. But the person who spoke English then made a few phone calls and found a place and wrote out in Japanese on a business card for a taxi driver to take me to the store, wrote out then another card to give to the store and tell me what I wanted, then wrote a third one out so I can get back to my hotel. So that was actually kind of nice. The only difference is this had green livery instead of the company's livery. Been to Australia a couple of times. Australia is sort of interesting because, of course, about half the Australian engines are made in the U.S., half are made in England. There's a couple examples. My wife liked this one because it's AN, which is her initials for Australian National Railroad. And most South America that has been in Argentina. There's a pretty large collection Argentina has a large number of trains that were actually pretty much made in Brazil. I mean, Brazil, I guess, is the center of manufacturing in Australia. And let's see, the train stores I went to, there were two train stores we saw in Buenos Aires. One had probably the biggest collection of 40s to 50s Lionel in the original boxes that I've ever seen, besides having a lot of MTH and besides having a lot of Athearn kits, surprisingly. Another sort of group of cars I've picked up has been mail travels by rail. There's Upper Swiss, British, Dutch is the PTT, La Poste is France, and Australia. And I've actually seen all those actually on the track. There's all sorts of whimsical trains that you can buy in Europe, like you can buy in the US. When we were in England one Father's Day, I found this on the at my breakfast plate with a smiling daughter and wife. Looks like the farming car was actually bought in a circus in Innsbruck. Went to the circus, went to buy a soda, and came back with a train car. And later found out, looking at the program, this circus had a special train car every year, and you could buy a whole circus train over the years. There's again, whimsical beer car, and on the right, we bought in Germany, 2001, just about the time, or 2002, just about the time the Euro was taking over, and someone made a car that one side had Euros arriving, it was bringing Euros in, the other side was taking Euros away, and it was being sold at the local post offices. Okay, just want to remember, although you looks like they all have a lot of couplers and a lot of different couplers, and probably seen there's probably, I think, 5 different types I showed you. Most European trains have new coupler pockets. They're called NEM pockets, and it turns out they build Cadies that plug in, so you can actually buy Cadies to put in and run here. Ones that got away. Someone asked me, have you been in countries where there's never been trains? And the answer is yes. I'll just quickly point out Greece. I've seen a lot of German HO in stores, but and train museums, but never found a Greek train, although I can buy them on the web. Finland, the same thing. We could never find trains. In fact, even went to a train store with the rector of the Helsinki School of Economics, since he was Finnish and had HO trains he bought in Boston while at Harvard. He knew what we're looking for, and he had never seen 8 Finnish models either. Malaysia, it turns out there's one Malaysian model, none were in stock. Ireland, I've been to Dublin, never got a chance to go over to Mark's Models. Slovakia, I was in the block of the ETS headquarters on a Sunday when the shop was closed. Poland, the same thing. Iceland, there are no trains in Iceland. That's a quote from Bob Buck. And I just want to point out the lower right corner is a train of Iceland. And Cy Berger told me that Bob went there on his honeymoon because that was the only place his wife would let him go because there were no trains there. So I just want to say that Bob told a little fish story here because there is a train. England, I could have got some Hornby, but there was no Hornby available. And at a tour museum, France, I actually thought of getting a train at one point. We were driving from Marseille to Aix-en-Provence, and it was a perfect place. However, we had just got off a plane. It was like 100 degrees. Our daughter said, "Oh, my tummy is a little upset." So we pulled over at a rest area, walked in. There was these great magazines with trains in them, and you got a model train if you bought the magazine. I said, well, since really she wanted some water, and I figured I'd better get outside quickly. I didn't buy any trains. Never saw them again at all. Okay, just a little comment where the hobby's going in Europe and the world wise. Hobby shops are closing everywhere. When we started going to Stockholm's about the size of Boston. There was probably 8 or 10 hobby shops, and plus other places to buy trains. Now there's literally 1 or 2. A lot of department stores still sell trains, just sets. Even if they have trains, they're not in the toy department. They're usually a separate train department. Luckily, some of the major hobby stores have embraced the internet. Rainer is a big example. That was our neighborhood train store in Innsbruck. I get 2 or 3 emails from them a week. They have incredible selection from around the world, including American. England and Germany, you can buy train magazines almost any newsstand. Other countries, you have to go to a big newsstand. And interesting, model railroad and trains are almost available worldwide in almost any newsstand. The story I remember about that is Malaysia. I was in Kuala Lumpur, but I got to Kuantan. Kuantan's a small town basically facing Vietnam. That's where many of the boat people arrived when they ran from the communists or floated away from the communists. And when I was taking the 24-hour flight, I was really angry that the latest issue of Model Railroader had not arrived. It should have arrived in Amherst. It arrived probably the day I left. Get to Kuantan Airport, and the airport is 2 gates. It's probably smaller than the inside of the Amherst Railroad Society building, and there on the newsstand is the latest issue of Model Railroader and Trains. Okay, well, I think that's about it. Go back to John, and thanks for having me.
Excellent. And guys, our last speaker scheduled will have to come next time. But let me go back to making myself the presenter again, just so you can see the picture one last time. Now a couple of announcements. We'll probably have another one of these, and that should take us right up until the end of phase 2 when we could actually start having meetings again. So I think we're having another one just before July 4th. We've been about 3.5 weeks from the last one. Let's do it again in about 3 weeks. So it'll be towards the end. If you want to present, email me. And if you've got something cool, we'll definitely put you on. We were varied this evening, and that's what I loved about it. A lot of different stuff. So I thank all the presenters. And one last trick on the door prize, guys. Name the 4 layouts. Send the names to me in an email, show director at Amherst Railway, and you will win a 2020 commemorative car. So that's why we're holding on that screen. So thank you guys all so much for showing up. We had all about in the low 40s at one point. So we've got a lot of people, and look for our announcements for the next one. Guys, it's right, and look at this. It's right at an hour, just like we did last week. So thank you so much for attending. We'll get the word out, and we shall